So the first question, right, is what is the joy? And luckily we found the most qualified person to come up and talk about that. Naomi Ceder is going to be our opening keynote with her talk, What is the Joy?
I jump around way too much. Okay, yeah, as you heard, I'm Naomi, and as you've also heard, if you want to make a donation to the conference, I'll be happy to sign a copy of the Quick Python book. I'll sign it with any name you want, honestly. I really don't care, but I do encourage you to consider that. And, well, for the rest of it, I'm afraid if you want to know more about me, you'll just have to look it up because, as you see, I don't have that traditional keynote speaker intro brag thing. In fact, as you'll notice, I don't have any slides at all. This actually sort of surprised the organizers when they asked me for a copy of my slides. And, you know, there's some reasons for this. For one thing, it is a fact that bullet point slides will suck your intelligence right out through your eyeballs. Scientific fact, and I would rather not do that to you today. I also kind of like to change things up. And as I say, I jump around a little bit, so this gives me a little bit more chance to wander around. So, yeah, it's going to be just you and me. That's what we got. So, as has been noted, and it's really kind of interesting how we really didn't coordinate this as much as you might think. But yeah, here we are on this Saturday of our own free will at a conference that is dedicated to the joy of computing. And when I saw that, it made me wonder, what is this joy? What are we talking about here? So that is what I want to talk about for a few minutes. I do have a little bit of a disclaimer. Most of what I will be talking about is based on specifically coding. I have done other things in computing over my time, and I think that the things I'm saying about coding will be pretty much applicable to all of it from DevOps to design work. I think that we have some common ground here. So I'm going to start. I honestly don't know if I'm qualified to speak about joy at all, but I will give you the one qualification that I've got to be standing up here as far as I can tell, and that is that I am quite ridiculously old. Really, I look out here and I say, oh my God. I started coding in the 80s. I have coded on machines from Apple IIs to various, what we used to distinguish from everything else as the PC platform, to the various flavors of Macs that have come along. I have worked on Apple ProDOS and MS-DOS and Windows from Windows 3.0 on for a while, and the various flavors of Mac, and I've done Linux for ages, so I've seen all of those things, and I have written code starting in AppleSoft Basic and 6502 Assembler, Pascal C, C++, Visual Basic, Delphi, Java, some PHP, a little bit of Perl, even some JavaScript, and of course, about 18 years ago, I kind of settled into what has ever since been my language of choice, Python. Now, all of that, honestly, isn't that impressive, but it does give me the vantage point of some 35 years of doing this, and I hope that the things I have seen over that time in writing code, in working with people who write code, and in fact teaching people to write code, maybe can give me a little bit of perspective on this that I can share with you. So, first of all, this is an audience participation part of the program, okay? So you had a little chance to wake up. But really, it's dead easy. Just a question here. So, all the people out here, how many of you would honestly say that you think writing non-trivial coding, or if you do something else, some non-trivial thing, how many of you think that that is hard? Yeah, I mean, I certainly do. How many of you think it's frustrating and sometimes maddening? Now we're telling the truth. Thank you very much. So, yeah, I mean, it seems sometimes that even just understanding the requirements and implementing a basic solution can be quite a challenge. Debugging can be, honestly, a nightmare. And even better, going back and understanding code you yourself wrote 2 months ago can give you an enormous headache. Okay? And if you're new to this, I'm sorry, I've got bad news for you. It doesn't get any better. It stays that way. Okay? And yet, here we are on a Saturday of our own free will at a conference celebrating the joy of computing. So what is this joy? So here's my second part. It's the other audience participation part. You can go to sleep after this. So how many of you here would say, again, be honest, how many of you would say that you have experienced something that you would call the joy of computing? Or if you don't like joy, satisfaction. Okay. That's interesting. It's all the same people, okay? Now, one thing I want you to do is I want you to kind of think back to some of those moments of joy of computing and keep them in your mind. Because as I talk, I want you to think about whether or not what I'm saying makes any sense at all or not. So, I guess the first thing we want to talk about then is, can something frustrating also be a source of joy? And I think this dichotomy, or whatever you might call it, kind of fools some people. Over 20 years ago, I used to, for several years, be sort of a serious runner. I coached cross country in the space of about 6 or 7 years. I ran more than a dozen marathons. And there were people who liked to pose this kind of question to me. They would always say, so, you run a lot, right? You do that for fun? And I would say, well, yeah, I guess I do. I guess you could call it fun. Yeah, sure. And that's when they would spring their trap. Aha, I got you. And they would say, I saw you at that half marathon last weekend. None of you people were smiling. So it's like, yes, that is right. But in fact, I think that we ought to be able to get past this pretty easily, that doing something challenging, something that requires effort, that requires concentration, that requires practice, something that is difficult, can in fact be a source of joy. There really isn't a problem with that, whether it's running a marathon or rock climbing or knitting a sweater or drawing a complicated drawing, learning a difficult dance, or even writing a program. All of those things are challenging. All of those things are difficult. But all of those things, I think, can be a source of satisfaction. Now, that is not to say, mind you, that all difficult things are fun. I'm not saying that. Nor would I say that all challenging things are satisfying to all people. And I think, in fact, that for the people who like computing, who like working with programs, creating systems, things like that, that there is a particular type of challenge that appeals to us. And for this, I want to go back to Alan Kay. How many of you know Alan Kay? Does that name ring a bell? Okay. He was the creator of Smalltalk, which was the first object-oriented language. In the 80s, he was a key person at Xerox Palo Alto Research Facility that shaped so many things that are now just matter-of-fact elements of computing, from laser printing and networking to graphical interfaces, etc. And he was interviewed actually back in the 90s, and he described programmers. The thing about programmers is that They like complicated things. They delight in learning complicated things. And I think, honestly, having known a lot of people in this business for many years, I think there is something to that. I think in general, we like puzzles and figuring out complicated things. And it's obviously not the same puzzles for everybody, but the common theme is something that is complicated, something that is hard to figure out is a challenge that a lot of us just can't leave alone. So, fine. I think even more than that, though, I think the thing that maybe makes it even a little bit more addictive, at least for me, and I think for a lot of people, is the fact that really all of what we do is about managing complexity, and I think in one particular way, and that is whenever we're doing something, we're taking a problem, a situation, some data that is coming from the outside of the little system we're making and is itself enormously complex. And the way that we can make it work, the only way that we can make it work, is by understanding that complex system well enough that we can decide what pieces we can abstract so that we can do whatever it is we want to do. There is no way we can model everything. And in fact, the past few years, I've been doing a certain amount of drawing and painting. No surprise, I work for an art supply company now. I've been struck that that's the same thing when you're doing things like that as well. The whole challenge is not so much the technique. You need to understand that, but it's really deciding what things you're going to abstract and represent. That's the hard part. And I think as you look at people developing systems in our business, that's also the thing that takes the longest to learn in general. Understanding how to write a piece of code is one thing. Understanding what goes into that code is much harder. So that in itself is pretty interesting, I think, but I don't think that is all that is part of what I would call the joy of computing. I think there are a couple more things to it. And one of them in particular is that, yes, we like to solve a challenge, we like to master this complexity and understand the system and do all of those things. But more so than that, I think people who write programs, who create systems, etc., want it to do something. Okay, now that may sound really obvious, but I used to teach people programming, and you notice that, particularly in the bad old days, all programming examples did nothing. They were just ways to exercise the fact that you could make, add two numbers together, or, my favorite example is calculate the volume of a swimming pool, who cares? Things like that. And the real motivation for people is when the code they write does something. And it might just be blinking a light, but hey, you've got a room full of 8th graders, blinking a light is enormously powerful. Actually, I have a room full of adults. Blinking a light is enormously powerful. So it might be that, it might be drawing a picture, it might be driving a robot, it might be, as various groups like Django Girls do, it might be creating your own simple blog site that works. It might be being able to extract some insight from a seemingly random pile of data. It might be any number of things. But we want it to do something. And again, I invite you to think back. I asked you to kind of keep those examples sort of floating around in your head. And you can ask yourself if, in fact, those times that you found your coding satisfying involved code that actually did something. So, I think we're getting close. I think I would add one more ingredient to my list. And that is, and this is something that we're getting better at, but still tends to be forgotten all too often, and that is that we are all social beings. Even the most stereotypical, introverted, computer nerd, hidden away from everyone, is still a social being. And as social beings, we like to have the value of what we have done accepted and acknowledged. Okay? And this is, it's a validation that what you've done has value. This is, after all, just about the only thing that you get from an open source contribution. It's what everybody wants, though. Can I get my code accepted? Yes, I did. And honestly, the times I've had that, it's like, even if it's a very tiny change, it's like, yes! It's out there and people are going to use it. So, or it might be being acknowledged you write a utility at work that everybody uses. It's like it's that feeling that you've made a contribution of value and it is accepted and acknowledged. So, that, I think, all of those things, I think, are what I would say add up to what is this joy. We delight in the challenge of solving a complicated problem, of managing that complexity in a way that allows us to create a solution that does something to solve a meaningful problem. And we want to have that work accepted and validated as a meaningful contribution. Again, you can think back your own examples and decide whether you agree or not. Now, why should we care? What does this matter? Well, I would argue that, first of all, on a personal level, and this is, again, coming from the fact that I am damn old, on a personal level, knowing what you want to do, and then doing that, rather than things that do not give you satisfaction, is very important. We do have only a limited time here, and I, for one, have certainly reached the point where I am not going to waste it on things that do not, in some way, give me joy. The other side of it, I think, looking more out from the individual, as we try, and we are not successful yet, but we continue to try to make our spaces, our communities, our teams at work, our workplaces more inclusive and more just. As we try to do this and we bring in people who are different, whether that might be because we're trying to do the right thing, or maybe we're just simply out of self-interest realizing that diverse teams are more effective. Whatever it might be, as we bring in people who are different from ourselves, we need to keep in mind that, yes, they are probably motivated by much the same things as we are. And if in fact we bring these people in, and let's say we've solved all of the obvious problems that we still struggle with, we have a safe workplace, it's not toxic, we have all of those things. If even then we still do not make sure that the people coming in have a chance to tackle those tough problems, manage that complexity, create a solution, and have that solution acknowledged, if we don't give them that joy, they will quite rightly leave. As we try to do this, we need to keep that in mind as well. I think we all need, in other words, to help everybody else find as much joy in this business as we can. Honestly, that is what I have got for you. I similarly hope that over the course of this day, we can all find a little bit more joy and maybe help everyone else have a little bit more joy too. So, thank you very much.